In the case of large language models, they don't predict the future, but they predict the next word that has a higher probability of appearing with other words.
One of the beauties of LLMs is that they can work with unstructured data.
Yeah, so you still have to add some sort of a structure to your unstructured data. I think if you haven't built the models, then you don't understand the weakness and the strength of the models. We collect data from everywhere. We don't care if there's propaganda happening in Russia. There's also same propaganda happening in the West. I know for a fact that Cabinet Office in the UK are collecting data of members of parliament, anything they're posting online.
The human analyst is still central to the whole process.
I would use them for research tasks, but I would not use them for critical tasks. I think there's a lot of noise in the market, and there's a lot of hype in the market. These need to disappear.
Hello and welcome. It's Capital Horizons, the podcast where money meets politics. I am Igor Yelnik. My guest today is Maryam Torshizi, founder of DeepSearch Labs. Hello, Maryam. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Igor. Thanks for having me.
Maryam, you're running an AI company, and many of your clients are financial organizations, asset management organizations. In your opinion, how does AI changing the way they invest and they manage money and make the investment decisions?
So it's a very wide question. We've got different types of asset management firms. We've got those that are very advanced, systematic. They've been around for a little while, and they've been using these agents to do investments on their behalf. They're a team of two running just algorithms that would decide what stocks they should be investing in, how they should be investing in. So those teams tend to be very advanced. And then we've got on the other side companies that haven't got their data in order, still struggling with data engineering. They haven't even passed that data engineering and knowledge collection, so they're still in that early phase. You also got a lot of asset management in between, where they have got some data, but they don't know how to utilize that data with new algorithms like large language models, large vision models. We've got quant teams who are using large language models for scenario testing, for example, especially in the risk management space. We've got equity researchers who use large language models to create consensus reports. We've got macro investors who use sell-side research, for example, and aggregates of other data to find out what is the trade idea for this week. So they can create, but they tend to be more quant type of investors rather than quantitative or qualitative. On the quantitative side, the large language models are used for creation of synthetic data, for risk management, as mentioned, on scenario testing, for automation sometimes, and figuring out they create baskets of stocks basically, and they automatically trade on them. So depends on which stage and what industry, what parts of the financial industry you belong to.
Okay, that's interesting. What do you think is the most typical scenario? Where is the AI used the most in the investment industry now?
I would say on the asset management sides, a lot, and they tend to focus on research sides as well as back office and also sales. So RFP creation, presentation creation, those kind of things tend to be very popular. On the private side, so private investment, they still do not rely on LLMs to go through, for example, when they get 200 pages of document from a company and they are assessing that company for debt investment, they still have to go through that 200 pages of document in order to not miss a point, because that point could determine whether they should be giving capital to a end client or a company or not. So they don't rely on large language models. They think that they need to read everything. So that's on the private capital side. On the public side, it's quite popular. A lot of the companies have been using Copilot, and that has rolled out since the beginning when Copilot became available. And because a lot of companies have got Microsoft contracts anyways, they rolled them out very easily. And they tend to use Copilot for summarizations of emails, so not, and maybe summarization of some articles, but they don't really use it to do proper research. They don't rely on the outputs because the outputs tend to be inaccurate sometimes, or they have to do double checking, making sure that the outputs are correct. So really, companies are using them in a variety of different ways, but they're more prevalent on the public side with researchers and portfolio managers than they are with investors on the private side.
Interesting. But from what you are saying, it follows that people tend to use AI models more for what I would call research and back office side of the business, not for the actual signal generation and trading.
Correct. I think
Why do you think so?
relying on these systems requires knowledge of the system, and you need to understand the back end of these algorithms. You need to understand these algorithms really well. I also think that there's a element of responsibility that comes with the role of investment, and I think as a result of that, companies hold their portfolio managers accountable for whatever goes wrong. They can't really say the algorithm has done it or algorithm has told me, and as a result of that, even when we were working with equity research firms, one of the things that when we were onboarding them, one of the things that the companies mentioned was that we should not allow investment advice to appear within the chat outputs. And I asked specifically why. And one of the reasons was that they want their investors to make their own decisions so that they become responsible for whatever outputs they're putting forth. And so the algorithms cannot give buy, sell recommendation, for example. So, and which I find very interesting.
Well, this raises a host of questions immediately. The first one is the matter of explainability. The LLM is a thing with billions or even hundreds of billions of parameters, which are absolutely impossible to comprehend to any normal human being. And nevertheless, each asset manager deals with stakeholders. These may be investment committees, that may be boards, and all those people need to understand what is going on. It's very difficult to explain that, some of those 100 billion parameters took a wrong value. So how do people go about this problem of explainability?
Yeah, so I think they kind of avoided utilizing the current AI algorithms that are more common in their investment processes, but they're relying on the old machine learning algorithms, basically, like still investing on a momentum, nowcasting. These things are still very popular, and there's still machine learning run, but they're not large language models, and they're not generative algorithms, basically. So they tend to be focused on a set number of parameters where you can have control over your output, even if your output is considered a black box. Is not as it's still explainable in the sense that it is mathematical or statistical. You can still explain it by stats. In the case of large language models, when you're using it, it's a pattern recognition at scale. That's what large language models are. And they are predictive. So they don't predict the future, but they predict the next word that has a higher probability of appearing with other words. So if your underlying data that has been used for training this algorithm has not been of great quality, you obviously will get very wrong outputs as a result. If your data was skewed to one direction or another, you get skewed outputs and results. Now, you can look at these large language models as tools rather than as everything, which is what they're being sold under the umbrella of. They can do data ingestion, they can do data engineering, they can do predictions, they can do a lot of things. But actually, if you just look at them as tools and you still have the same process of data engineering, and you can bring your data into a format that is understandable by these models, you still do what the traditional quant would do, making sure your data that is going into the system is of good quality. You will have a high probability of getting good outputs. So
Yeah, but with the data, it's a very important point, in my opinion. One of the beauties of LLMs is that they can work with unstructured data. What you are saying, unstructured is okay, but actually it will be good if you add some structure to the data.
yes, you still have to add some sort of a structure to your unstructured data. Like if you're passing in transcripts and your transcripts are open-ended questions, right? So you have a transcript that says you do like the color purple, and
I don't.
the interviewee, yes, exactly, you say I don't, right? And then if you pass this to a large language model and all of the questions are of similar style, and then you ask a question, first it will get confused between an interviewer and interviewee answers and questions. So it might take interviewees answers and just ignore them, and then take the interviewer question as answer. So it will get confused. So you need to have a pre-processing of this data in order for it to be passed correctly to this large language model, for it to understand what the data entails. So that's on one side. We also have got other things, like, for example, um, they are considered, some of the multimodal models are very popular in the industry. But if you're passing on a handwritten note to some of these, right? So, for example, we are working with a large national uh, um, institution, and they have a lot of handwritten notes, and they would like to be able to transcribe them. If you're passing the whole thing as a page into these large language models, they don't understand it. So you still have to chunk this page in order for the large language model to uh, well, as close as possible, predict what the words are on that page, right? Or within that chunk. But if you don't chunk it, then it will come up with very wrong outputs. So you still have to do data engineering, regardless of what the industry of tech is telling people. Because without that, you're not going to get good outputs.
Does it help? Does this data engineering help solve the problem of hallucination?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have linked data, so you have named entities, you have like name of companies, and you have properly linked them to correct information. You have a description for this company, you have a description for a product, you have a description for a person. Then you have this data collected and linked properly, so that if there is a he, she, it, the market, the company, they've been replaced with the correct name. If there's a mention of the company across multiple data sets and you have unified them, then that's linking, basically. But you need to unify them correctly, because you don't want to replace them with the wrong information, obviously. But if you manage to get that linking right and you pass that correct output to large language models, then you will get answers without hallucinations.
Yeah, this seems like quite a lot of work, and
Yes,
it doesn't appear like too many AI companies or too many AI products incorporate this kind of approach, and therefore most of the commercial products which we are seeing on the market are still prone to hallucination.
correct.
Now, if I am a portfolio manager, an asset manager, and I use a model, this model hallucinates. It's not the model who is responsible before the client. It's me.
Correct.
It's my responsibility to make sure that everything is right, that I deliver good returns, and not because if I lose money, it shouldn't be because the model hallucinated.
Correct.
So, doesn't this problem introduce some additional risks and some additional hurdles on the way of adopting AI or LLMs into the practice of asset management firms?
So there are a few asset management firms who I've been speaking with, and they've been exploring knowledge graphs and hypergraphs, basically. And hypergraphs and knowledge graphs are a way to organize your data and link your data. Now, if you pass the result of that knowledge graph to, or mix it with the large language model, you will get accuracy. Then you can rely on the outputs. Then you can assume that the output that is coming out is correct. But not all asset management firms are currently doing this. And you are right, they are responsible for the investment they're making, the decision they're making, and it has actually probably cause more headaches for asset managers and investors than anything else. For example, we worked with one company, um, and they mentioned that their pain point was that they have to double check everything. So when they're getting an output, they can't just say, oh, this is the right output. I'm just going to put it into the report and then I'm going to send it to my clients or I'm going to send it to the portfolio managers. Um, and what they were saying was that the company had told them that they need to check and make sure that the output is correct. So that means that if they were pulling information out of a large amount of documents, they had to go through and manually check those documents to make sure that the output was correct. So they were actually doing the work twice. And as a result, they didn't see any efficiency in using any of these commercial models, which meant that they felt like they should just do the work without using these commercial works. And they were just using these commercial models for reformatting the output that they had found manually for creating reports and sections of the reports that they wanted. But even on the report side, they had to check, make sure that everything that they had written was taken as is and not changed. So it felt like they were doing more work than than they should have done, basically, on a daily basis.
Yeah, this sounds a bit laborious, I would say.
Yes.
Uh, and okay, so apart from these types of errors, which are possible because of poor data management, what are other risks which may be introduced by AI in asset management?
I think if you are one of the things that I feel like asset management industry hasn't learned yet is that before all of these machine learning, like large language models, they become very popular, they kept complaining about legacy softwares and legacy tech. And they kept saying, oh, we shouldn't really build in-house anymore. It doesn't make any sense. We are spending so much money in-house. And now since ChatGPT made large language models available to the entire public, there's this whole race of like building in-house. And actually majority of them don't go past a proof of concept. So they spend a lot of time and money and then they don't go past proof of concept, which is quite expected if you think about it, because if you do not have the specialization to like productionize models, to understand how these models work, to ensure that there's accuracy attached, then you are never going to take them to production. You're never going to start using them. A lot of the companies, I know, like for example, Schroders has got its own large language model internally. JP Morgan has got its own large language model internally, but majority of the people are not using them for research. They're using them for like other things, like very quick outputs that they can pull out, but they still can't rely on the outputs of these large language models. The cost of developing these models were quite high, so the cost of operating them is also quite high. So you are still back in the same point of creating legacy software, and then these models progress and you have to replace them. And every time you're replacing them, you need to do further testing, further training. So there's continuous cost associated that is actually not small, it's quite large. So yeah, I find the path that companies are taking very interesting.
Okay, but don't you think that when people do use AI models, when they do use them properly, and when they use them to build return forecasts, which not too many people do, as we have discussed, this may introduce some new risks which haven't been there before because of the complexity of the models they are using. Even with all the explainability for the boards, these models are quite opaque and difficult to interpret.
Correct. Yes. So there are all definitely risk associated to the models themselves, the cost of operating these models. And I would also say there are risks associated, especially because I think if you haven't built the models, then you don't understand the weakness and the strength of the model as well. And there are also issues with the models. They don't have good evaluation systems out there. A lot of companies are actually struggling with evaluating these models. Most of the evaluations are coming from the companies that have produced them themselves. And actually, it has gotten to a point where companies are relying on qualitative evaluation of these models, where they collect data from end users and say, can you say if this app output was accurate, which output would you prefer? And I think that shows that these models cannot be evaluated. So if you're using them in your investment process, you should be very wary of the results that you're getting. Uh, where exactly are you using it? If it's something critical, I would not use them for critical tasks. I would use them for research tasks, but I would not use them for critical tasks like putting money behind an index or investing in a specific bundles of stocks. I find that's a bit risky. And they would work when the market is doing really well. You never know as the regime changes what happens.
Yeah, obviously, because then stationarity is lost, and the models you use the models which were trained on a completely different set of data, like from a
Correct.
previous era, which is absolutely inapplicable right now. But what you said means another important thing is that the human analyst is still central to the whole process.
I think so. I don't think that you can replace humans yet. I think these models are far, far behind. Even when it comes to coding, there are a lot of hype around how great the codes are that are being produced by different models. They produce a lot of lines. So if you think about it from a fashion point of view, let's just pass from investment point of view and coding. If you
Mhm.
look at it from a fashion point of view, there was a period of time that people were tailoring your clothes, and the clothes were very well fitted, and then but it was costly and expensive, and not that many people could afford them. And suddenly came fast fashion, where they were producing these clothes en masse, right? But now we have the same thing with coding with these large language models, right? So they produce these codes. They're not of great quality. They're fast codes. So you get these codes, and then they're not production ready. You still have to go through them to optimize them. So is that gonna add any time to your, or would it have been better if you had written something from scratch yourself? So the question is, how do you use these fast codes, right? If you can figure out how to use them properly and efficiently and have them optimized, then you have struck gold, right? But majority of the time, these codes are not of great quality, just like fast fashion, where the clothes that are produced are not of great quality. You have to throw them out after a few time of wearing them. And it's the same thing with these codes, is that they are used for one-off thing, and then you have to throw them out or replace them with something better. So you still need the humans in the loop. And it's the same thing when it comes to investment. You might think that you can replace a human with algorithms. You still need a human to decide what algorithms should be used, when these algorithms should be used, how should they be used. It's like a pilot. You still need a pilot to run an aeroplane. You can't really
I'm
automate.
not so sure about that.
I am sure about that, because if something malfunctions, then the pilot, a human, has to take over, and all the systems are down. It's the human that lands the plane. Um,
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, I had my first experience of riding in a driverless car, and I can tell you that it felt very safe.
I think,
Maybe because it wasn't a rush hour, maybe because the roads around me were empty, but it felt really good.
but then there are also reports of these cars having accidents. So I
Like
think,
human-driven cars also have accidents, right? And
correct. But then
yeah.
you assume that a model that is automated would behave better, but actually it doesn't, right? So the point is that you might get a good output one time, and then next time you might have a faulty output. And if it is automated, then you have no chance of controlling it. However, if there's a human in place, you can control better, in my opinion.
Well, that's a bold statement, I would say. Anyway, let's get back to that analyst, to this investment analyst who is giving recommendations to, let's say, portfolio managers about certain potential events. And let's think about some political events, in particular, some binary events and some events which are not priced in the market. Let's think about things like Brexit, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or the continuous changes of government in the UK or in France, or things like Liberation Day in the US. Is there any chance that large language models should be able to help the analyst to correctly predict how these events are going to turn out?
Yeah, so it depends on again, we assume that the data engineering is done correctly and the large language model is being used on a correct data set, right? If you are again relying only on the large language model outputs, I would say the chances of you getting the right output and predicting is very low. However, if you are basing your output on the data that you've collected or you are collecting, then if you've done the right collection, i.e. your data is unbiased, you've collected data from different kinds of sources rather than one kind of source, then the chances of you being able to predict it is very high. Now, let's look at Brexit. When people started looking at Brexit and they started using algorithms, like I remember I went to a BlackRock event where they mentioned that they use Twitter outputs to predict Brexit, and Twitter outputs said remain. But what they didn't realize was that Twitter is one platform. And at that time, Twitter was run by liberals and liberal individuals. So, of course, when you're collecting data from like certain sets of people who are all Remain, your output will be Remain. Now, if they had collected data from think tanks, from conservative, for example, like groups that were on Facebook, on different places, they would have had a more unbiased data set. During Brexit, I went to two events. One was Labour, one was Conservative. And I listened to the audience. In Labour, half the room were exit. In Conservative, everybody was exit. So after I left those two events, and they were big events, I was like, okay, well, you know what? Brexit is happening. I came back to the office. This is when I was doing equity research. And I told my managers that I think Brexit is happening. And they looked at me and they said, no, you don't understand the culture of the UK, and it's never going to happen. And when it happened, I came to the office, obviously very sad, because it's not a great thing that, you know, there's segregation happening around the world and this worldview is dropping. But could there have been a quantitative way of doing it? Yes, there could have been if you had looked at the right data sets. And Twitter alone was not the right data set. Media alone was not the right data set. So you had to look at other things like consultancy reports, like think tank reports. Think tanks produce a lot of reports on different things. And I think that would have been very valuable. Now, when we started the company, it was actually to do this sort of predictions, basically. My company was to do predictions on trends. I wanted to know what are the trends and put my money on it. So I started doing a lot of testing on, for example, political events. One of them was Kamala Harris and Trump's election. And I wanted to know if, with all the data that we are collecting, which is from media, social media, consultancy reports, think tanks, podcasts, even, can we actually predict whether Trump is going to win or not? And actually, the output that we got from the large language models that we are operating, was very good because it was very well balanced. It said why Harris was popular and what made Trump win and what are the chances of Trump winning. And one of the things that kept coming up was there were statistical models that were run that predicted that Trump has a higher chance of winning, basically. And there were economic models, not like you know, statistical without economy, and like it was very financial focused, basically. And I found that very fascinating. So actually I put my money on Trump.
Okay.
And same thing, I think, like, you know, if we had such a tool in 2018, we would have known that also Trump will come into power as well. But at that time, it just didn't exist, unfortunately.
Okay, but right now it exists. And
Yes.
if we speak about the events of today, we have conflicts in Israel, and we have a conflict in Ukraine.
Yes.
And if you are right, you should be able to say what is the probability that the war in Ukraine is going to end in the next month or in the next 3 months, for example. Can you say
Correct.
that?
I haven't tested it, but I can try with the application and come back to you with an answer on that. Because that wasn't something that I looked at, but I did look at the probability of war starting with Ukraine, and our application said that there was a high chance of war starting between Russia and Ukraine. We also predicted Israel and Iran war, which I thought was very interesting. But again, what I would emphasize on the data you're collecting, we collect data from everywhere. So, for example, Russia Times is actually banned in the West, so you can't really access it. But we do collect that data on a daily basis because we believe that Western data is Western focused. So you need to also collect data from other parts and other regions of the world in order to create an unbiased data set. It's not We don't care if there's propaganda happening in Russia. There's also same propaganda happening in the West. So to create an unbiased data set, you need to collect data from everywhere. So the data that we collected actually said that there was going to be a war between Iran and Israel, which I thought was very interesting. Actually, we waited for it. We predicted this in December of last year, and we published on it. There was another one that we focused on, which was on rare minerals and tariffs. So we started picking up rare minerals as a trend back in September and September of last year. So we were like, what is this rare mineral? It keeps popping up, like, it's everywhere. And we couldn't figure out what it was. It was like used in satellites, it was used in defense, but there was not much information coming through. And the information that kept coming through was that there's rare minerals. China has a lot of it. They also have got access in Africa, but we didn't know what it was used for until Trump came into power. And then Trump started talking about how rare minerals should be Ukraine has got rare minerals and all of that, right? But it was fascinating to see that our application was able to pick that up. But again, underlying data is really, really important. I would emphasize on that. I think these large language models, again, if you look at them as tools, they're fantastic if you have the right data and right structure of data.
Okay. What if we speak about events which, to me at least, seem very unexpected? Like if we speak about the attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, could
Yes.
that one be predicted?
So we work for a corporate intelligence firm during that period, and they wanted to know everything about certain Palestinian politicians and their meetings with different parts of, like, in eastern parts, basically. And it was a fascinating report, but the reports raised a lot of questions because suddenly you could see information that were coming from how these politicians were making alliances with certain Eastern politicians. And as a result of that, like, there a lot of these intelligence firms were expecting something to happen. So that I found very interesting, that report. That I can't go into a lot of details of it, but that report that we worked on showed a lot of different individuals involved with these Palestinian politicians who were actually not living in even Palestine. They were living in UAE and they were living in Jordan. So I thought, like, application, if it can come up with information of how these people are meeting other people, basically, then it is, and then you can predict why they would be meeting if you are in the field, right? So we are not in the field of defense, so I don't know why, for example, a Palestinian politician and being an ambassador to Eastern European, country is such a big deal. But for me, it was like a very interesting project. But it showed that the application is capable of finding information and doing inference. Inference is something that is generally considered something that you can do as humans would do. These models are not meant to be very good at inference, but the models have got the prediction of words ability, which can sometimes help with inference, right? So, for example, if you are talking about this is a live project, and the information is, I would like to know the benefits that an individual is getting from a company. And these benefits could be childcare, could be like, work-life balance, but this is the text, the transcript of this information, right? The transcript does not actually mention the word childcare or doesn't mention the word work-life balance. But the person says, I work very long hours and it would have been nice to have like some time to spend with my kid. But it doesn't necessarily say I want work-life balance, right? So then from that, you can infer that the person wants work-life balance. So you can do some inference, but you can't really rely on it 100%. So it's important to know that. But that inference does help connect different data points together, and maybe make something visible if everything is completely referenced. Yeah.
All right, but from what you're saying, not about work-life balance, but about the binary events,
Yes.
is that if you are a president of a country or prime minister of a country or whatever it is, you should better use such tools because they may help you to identify that certain events may happen with higher probability than your intelligence may suggest.
Yes, absolutely. And also, you might use it for surveillance as well. Um, I know, for a fact that Cabinet Office in the UK are collecting data from social media of members of parliaments, and anything they're posting online is basically collected. Doesn't matter who they are, what level they are at, everything gets collected. So that kind of information is, what are you using it for, right? It's thematic analysis and also maybe surveillance. So you can use it for that. You can use it for um, understanding, like, data. For example, we've got cybersecurity defense consultancies on the application, where they collect a lot of government articles and they input it into the application, and they try to figure out what are the most common cyber attacks that are happening all around the world, and specifically regional. And they ask us, for example, to look at specific Twitter accounts for them. So when you look at all of that, you see a pattern, right? And that pattern is what was missing before the large language models were prevalent, because there was a lot of noise. And for a human to go through all of them and to find themes and topics is quite difficult. If you can get your data to a point where it is understandable by a large language model in a specific format, then you can find themes and you can find trends and you can find a lot of useful information. Maybe not in so much detail sometimes, but it's the starting point, if that makes sense. And then you can dig deeper into a topic that you're interested in.
All right, Mariam, you are an insider in this industry. You know it in and out. You have built your models yourself, so you know how it works in detail. And you've been working with clients both on the investment side and on the political side, it seems. And in your opinion, where from here?
I think there's a lot of noise in the markets and there's a lot of hype in the market. These need to disappear, and I do hope that they do very soon. Some people say that they might disappear in 2028. Well, that's what's actually our application set because of the election that's coming up in 2028. But whilst our application also suggested that some people say that it might be happening within the next 2 years, right? So I want these noises to disappear, because these noises have created very bad, um, it's almost hype of something that is not even there. And I think it's important to understand what these models are good for and what they're not good for, just like any other machine learning algorithms that we ever used as quants. When we looked back in time, we were using regressions, we were using support vector machines, we were using recommender systems, right? So all of these, but we understood the weakness, the strength, and then we used them very carefully. And I think these large language models are, again, another model, and you just need to understand their strengths and the weaknesses and use them in the right way. But with the hype that's going on, it's very difficult. There's also another thing that I have noticed, which is a pattern that's happening in industry, where people who are not really like people who start becoming heads of AI in certain companies, they don't have the skill set to be the heads of AIs. They don't understand the models, even though they're coming up with AI strategy. To come up with AI strategy, you need to understand the models. You need to understand how to use them. You need to understand their weakness, their strengths. So a quant would be a perfect person to actually lead an AI strategy because they come with the eye of suspicion always. They don't believe in anything. They are suspicious of the algorithms. They understand the whole garbage in, garbage out concept very well. Whereas if you don't have that concept, then you have the chance of losing lots and lots of money for your company. So I do want the hype to disappear. And I do want more people to start paying more attention to their data engineering and data side. And I can see that happening now. There's a lot of pattern in the industry of people focusing on their data. And this is coming from top level, actually, rather than just quants or data scientists or data engineers. It's coming from top level thinking their data is not of great quality and they need to do data engineering in order to get good outputs. And so that's something that I'm seeing. So I feel like that's going to become more and more apparent in industry, hopefully. And I'm hoping that the hype will disappear. And the third one is I do think that the next systems need to be something that can connect research report generation to audio generation to video generation. So it's like a circle where you can go from one to another very quickly. And that's where I see the future, is that you can create a content, a research report, research report on Nestle, for example, and then you can pass that to an audio, and then it will create a podcast for you. You can share it with your team. You can even publish it if you're sell side. And then you can also create a video very quickly. When I was doing equity research, I had a senior equity researcher who was producing weekly videos of himself giving speech about the industry that he was covering, TMT at the time. So imagine if he could write that content very quickly, the consensus report, pass it into a video generator with himself cloned and his voice cloned. And then all he has to do is press a button and then he's generated a video. He listens to it. If he's happy with the content, he will pass it on to his clients, right? That's where I see the future, that circular motion where you can go from report generation to podcast generation to video generation. And you can do all of it in one place. You don't have to move from one platform to another. And I think that's a great future.
Well, all I can say about it is that interviewing an AI would be much less fun than interviewing you.
That's true. Absolutely. But I think for content creation, not from an interview point of view. Oh, actually, I have one on interviewing. We work with an international development company where they send individuals to like different regions to collect information. And some of those regions are very risky regions. So they were actually contemplating of using AI conversational AI to send an individual that is not real to a region operated by army where they can collect information of different people. For example, let's say you want to send an individual to Syrian camp and the camp is quite dangerous. You don't want to risk the life of the individual you're sending. So you would send a conversational AI where maybe the people would be comfortable to converse with, and also because it's not a human, so they can basically say whatever they want to say. And then second is there's no risk associated to that international development company either. So there is a path forward for conversation with AI as well.
Well, yeah. Okay. Okay. I see what you mean.
But I think on podcasts, you obviously do not want to interview an AI. You want to interview a person. It's more interesting than I think having expert subject matter, individuals would be much more interesting to challenge than an large language model. let's say.
Indeed.
Yes.
At least I learned quite a lot of new things today. Thank you very much, Maryam. It was fascinating.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. This has been Capital Horizons.
So if you would like to see or learn more about Capital Horizons, please subscribe below.
From Michael and I. See you next time.